June 23, 1942. 7:30 p.m. RAF Pembrey, Wales. A low, blunt-nosed fighter drops its wheels, slews sideways in the crosswind, and settles with a squeal of tire rubber on the wrong runway. Ground crew freeze. Someone drops a marshalling wand. The pilot pops the canopy and for a long second seems to hesitate, then raises his hands. The badge on the fuselage is unmistakable, the black cross of the Luftwaffe. The aircraft is a Focke-Wulf 190, a machine British pilots have been cursing for 9 months. It has just landed itself, intact, on an RAF station. The air is still as a corporal climbs onto the wing with a Webley revolver. Inside the engine cowl, 14 stubby cooling fan blades tick as the motor winds down. One of the crewmen leans close and whispers, "We've got one." He doesn't say what every pilot at Biggin Hill has been thinking since autumn, that this single aeroplane might explain why men who used to come back are not coming back. By sunset, the pilot, Oberleutnant Armin Faber, is in a guardroom trying to translate the map that betrayed him. By midnight, RAF intelligence has riggers standing by to drain the tanks, pull panels, measure angles. By dawn, a new worry drifts through German ready rooms in France. If the British can read the 190's secrets, the season of easy kills may be closing. For months, the pattern had seemed unbreakable. Spitfire Mark versus climbed to meet intruders. FW-190s arrived, hit hard, and vanished. The RAF's proud little thoroughbred, the one that danced with Bf-109s over Dunkirk and won, was now being dragged across the sky by a heavier, meaner brawler that rolled faster, dived harder, and shrugged at cannon shells that seemed to detonate on its armor and leave only black smudges. On bad days, British squadrons bled 2 aircraft for every German fighter they brought down. On very bad days, they brought down none. One line foreshadows what comes next. A Spitfire with a new heart is already on the test stand, and its pulse beats quicker at height. The numbers told a different story. In the first year of the FW-190's operations on the Channel front, German fighter wings flew fewer sorties than the RF, but inflicted a higher loss rate, especially between sea level and 20,000 feet, where the Merlin 45 engine in many Spitfire fuselage began to wheeze, and where the Focke-Wulf's fat radial pulled like a tractor. A sleek British fighter accustomed to turning fights found itself on the wrong side of physics. The 190's roll rate, snap-quick, almost violent, let German pilots flick into a dive before a Spitfire pilot could get his guns steady. Its acceleration out of trouble made snapshots miss by inches. Every inch could be fatal. The RAF tried stopgaps, clipped wings to sharpen the Spitfire's roll, higher boost pressures for a touch more punch near the deck, new tactics that kept tight formations from bunching into a kill box. It helped, but it didn't change the fact that, between autumn 1941 and spring 1942, one side owned the initiative. And then a captured machine rolled to a stop on Welsh grass, and then a new Spitfire, one that had not been meant to exist, rolled out of the hangar. What happened next made the pattern obvious. The map zooms out. The channel is a thin, steel-colored strip on a wall chart at Uxbridge. To the south, on the French coast, 2 fighter wings, Jagdgeschwader 2 Richthofen and Jagdgeschwader 26 Schlageter, rotate fresh Focke-Wulfs through sleek concrete dispersals. Abbeville, Beaumont-le-Roger, St. Omer. The 190s sit heavy on their legs, broad-shouldered and compact, like wrestlers waiting for a whistle. To the north, Biggin Hill and Hornchurch and Kenley launch Spitfire Vers in pairs and fours, climbing curving spirals into a sky they no longer own by default. Terms matter, and so do systems. The RAF calls its missions circus, rodeo, ramrod, raids of bombers that need escorts, sweeps that need bait. The Luftwaffe names its flights in numbers and code words and measures success in interception times. The protagonist here is not a man, or even a single squadron. It's a method, a way of fighting that brings weight to the right place in the right minute. For a year, the 190 is the method. The FW-190A, early A1s and A2s moving quickly to A3s and A4s, is the first fully modern European fighter of the war. Broad track landing gear, a radial engine that soaks damage, a cockpit with excellent visibility, thick armor around the pilot, and a wing that trades a little lift for a lot of roll. At medium altitudes, the aircraft posts speeds around 400 miles per hour, climbs strongly, and dives like a stone with feathers. Its controls stay stiff but usable as velocity rises, and its 4 cannons and 2 machine guns mean a sloppy shot can still be deadly. It is the bully in the schoolyard who can also sprint. Across the water, the Spitfire Mark V is an elegant evolution forced into service by necessity, born when a more ambitious design stalled and the war refused to wait. Its Merlin 45 is a faithful engine, single-stage supercharged, happiest in the mid-teens of altitude, giving pilots a top speed a touch under 400 miles per hour on a good day. It turns beautifully. It points instinctively. At 15,000 feet and below, with the right pilot, it is still a knife. But knives meet clubs. When a fight spills vertical, the Mark V coughs where the 190 keeps breathing. Why did the British allow this mismatch to run for so long? They didn't. In January 1942, engineers and drawing offices from Supermarine to Rolls-Royce stared down a calendar they hated. The Spitfire Mach 8, the proper next step with a new, refined airframe, was months away. The front line was weeks from trouble, so they improvised like people who know that perfect is the enemy of alive. They took the Spitfire FEV airframe. They stuffed it with a new heart, the Merlin 61, a 2-stage, 2-speed supercharged engine that made the same power more cleverly, like a mountain runner who brings an extra set of lungs above 12,000 feet. Intercoolers, new radiator faces, plumbing that snaked and hummed, a propeller that bit deeper. They called the hybrid the Spitfire Mark. It wasn't meant to be the star. It would become the workhorse. By July 1942, operational squadrons begin to see them, first in 1s and 2s, then in flights. The new Spitfire looks familiar but feels different from the first throttle push. The power curve climbs and then climbs again. At 20,000 feet, where the old Merlin fell off, the new one wakes up. Rates of climb improve by whole minutes. Top speed moves from nearly to over 400 miles per hour at high altitude. The Spitfire's old gifts, its turn, its pointing, remain, now backed by lungs that don't gasp when the fight goes vertical. Pilots notice, the opposition notices, and the numbers quickly begin to bend. But before the Makawanks arrives in numbers, the RAF gets something else, proof. The FW190 that landed at Pembrey is dragged to Farnborough, stripped like a patient prep, and flown by British test pilots who write notes as if they were taking dictation from physics. The report is blunt on the things German pilots already know. Below 20,000 feet, the 190 can roll twice where a Spit 5 rolls once. In a dive, it builds speed very fast. Its armor and fuel system mean you need to hit it with more than luck. But the report carries hope between lines. The 190's edge fades above 20,000 and then fades more. A better supercharger, a better climb, and the Spitfire will not be trapped where the 190 is strongest. So the stage is set, a captured secret, a stopgap turned savior, 2 air forces rearming in public, and a summer ahead in which both sides will test stories they've been telling themselves for a year. The clock resumes. August 19, 1942. Pre-dawn, Sussex. Engines cough to life across a chain of airfields. The Dieppe raid is on, a brute force attempt to feel the European coast with 1,000 Canadian bayonets and see what bleeds. The RAF brings what it can to shield the ships and the beaches. Spitfire versus in quantity, a scattering of Spitfire mines in fresh paint, hurricanes, bombers that need shepherding. Across the water, the Luftwaffe scrambles FW-190s and BF-109s, and the day becomes a grinder. The statistics are cruel. Thousands of sorties, well over 100 Allied aircraft lost, scores of German fighters downed. But a different statistic hides in the noise. The few squadrons fielding the Makan, flying high cover where the Merlin 61 can sing, do not die the way the Mark V squadrons are dying. They are not untouchable. But the asymmetry, the feeling that the 190 is unbeatable, begins to fray. A young pilot taxis in after his second sortie and kills the switches. It climbs, he says, eyes wide, as if those 2 words hold an entire doctrine. A staff car waits for the debrief. The summer is shifting. By September, the RAF has enough Mach wings to stop hiding them. 2 wings operate them in strength. Pilots compare notes in messes with the flat cheerfulness of people whose friends have been names on boards too often. Don't chase a 190 in a dive, says one. He wants you to. Take it up, says another, tapping the altitude band on his kneeboard. Let the second stage do the work. They don't call the Merlin 61 a second stage when they write home. They call it a blower or the new wine above 20,000. But they feel what it does. James Johnny Johnson, already piling victories into a ledger that will make him Britain's top fighter ace, flies his first Mach 1 and understands instantly that the fight has tilted. He will later judge it the best balanced of all Spitfires, the mark that let him take the initiative back. That balance matters more than a headline number. Combat isn't a drag race. It's a flow of micro-advantages, climb here, roll there, a little extra control at 5 miles a minute, that add up to life. Numbers punctuate the shift. Where the Spitfire 5 lost speed and breath above 20,000 feet, the Mach 1 gains. Where climb rates used to be close, they now separate by hundreds of feet per minute. A Spitfire 9 can wind from sea level to 30,000 feet in minutes that once would have left it gasping below 20. At those heights, the FW190's sleek radial begins to look overweight. Its controls, so reassuring at medium levels, stiffen. In the band where daylight bombers will soon operate, the new Spitfire is a gatekeeper. German pilots adapt. They always do. Jagdgeschwader 26 doesn't stop fighting because the enemy fields a new model. They change their entry angles. They avoid altitude bands where the Spitfire waits. They pull more sorties at dawn and dusk, when coastal haze and low light blunt the top cover advantage. They lean harder on surprise, dive in, shoot, vanish, and they remind the very young men in their cockpits that nothing in air combat is fair. And still, something in the rhythm changes. The old certainty, tip to wingtip, this advantage is ours, becomes a question asked on every scramble. A cause and effect chain unfolds that has nothing to do with glory and everything to do with logistics. Rolls-Royce, staggering under the burden of 4 wars inside a war, fighters, bombers, transports, training aircraft, commits to building the 2-stage Merlin in quantity. Castle Bromwich ramps assembly of airframes pre-fitted for the new engine. Squadrons rotate to re-equipment stations like patients to operating rooms. Ferry in tired Voss. Ferry out bright IXs. Write new aircraft defects in the Form 700 and pray none of them are lethal. The RF's maintenance units stock new radiators and intercooler cores. Flight leaders rework climb schedules, fuel margins, and rendezvous altitudes to exploit an engine curve you can feel at your shoulder blades. At the same time, British tactics tune to the machine in hand. The tightly spaced Vic formations that looked pretty in photographs are already gone. The Finger 4 is now doctrine. 2 pairs, flexible, mutually supporting, with freedom to roll and pitch without colliding. Radio discipline stiffens. The days of endless chatter fade to clipped functional calls. Contact 10 right high, break, break, I'm with you. The Mech Myang doesn't demand this. The war does. But the aeroplane rewards it. When 2 Spitfires climb with intent and stay welded in turns, the 190's trick of breaking the fight with a snap roll loses some of its sting. Not all. Some. A micro scene. October 1942, mid-afternoon over northern France. A pair of Spitfire Wangs are top cover for a ramrod of fighter bombers. The sun is a blind arrow at their 12 o'clock. The leader sees 3 specks drop out of that glare. They were there the whole time, waiting. He calls the break. His wingman, a pilot who has never seen a 190 except as a photograph and a lecture, feels the aeroplane heave as he pulls. The first German flashes through the L-shaped space where he used to be. The second commits to the leader. The wingman doesn't chase. He climbs a touch, slides across the leader's turn, and sees the second 190 present a planform that is all wing and no tail, rolling, rolling, trying to scissor. He doesn't fire in the scissor. He pauses, lets the IX's nose settle with a steadiness he's only had in practice, and squeezes off 3 short bursts when the 190's roll pauses for a breath. White flashes, a puff of smoke, a canopy coming off. The German pilot's chute blooms like a gray flower. The British pilot doesn't whoop. He breathes out. He doesn't know yet that he has just lived the textbook that Farnborough wrote with the captured 190. Scale up. Multiply that by dozens of engagements where the difference between a near miss and a hit is half a second of steadier pointing at 20,000+ feet. Multiply by hundreds of sorties where a safe climb to a higher patrol height means the first shot belongs to the Spitfire. Multiply by thousands of hours where pilots who used to dive away are now willing to stay 1 turn longer. What you get is not a banner victory. It's a ratchet. One click, then another, and each click holds. Another micro-scene clicks in the opposite direction. A Spitfire Ein, full of confidence, tries to follow a 190 into a steep rolling dive near the deck. He knows the cautionary tale. He ignores it. The German rolls brutally, reverses, and the Spitfire overshoots. Cannon shells punch the skin just behind the cockpit. The pilot lives. He lands. He writes his report with a hand that shakes. Diving chase not recommended. The aircraft is better. Physics is still physics. The British do not pretend the Mekak time is perfect. At low altitudes, the FW-190 is still a handful, strong, stomping, with a first half-second in a roll that tosses off aim like a bull shrugging a rider. The RAF answers later with a low-flying variant, shorter blades on the supercharger, clipped wings with squared tips, but in 1942 the standard Mach 1X must be flown with respect near the ground. The best line pilots become instructors without leaving their squadrons, teaching new men to use altitude the way infantry uses cover. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe tries its own counters. The 190 gains heavier cannon for bomber interception, trades some agility for punch, and begins to carry bombs for fighter-bomber work. Jagdgeschwader 2 and 26 change their daily rhythms to meet raids with the winds, to avoid meeting the Eichs at its favorite height. German leaders, Pips Priller, Egon Mayer, men with reputations as sharp as their markings, keep their units sharp by example. They still win fights. They still tear apart the sloppy and the unlucky. But when British leaders tally combat reports at night, the arithmetic is different. The loss lines cross and recross. The trend line moves. A British squadron diary entry marks the difference in tone. Enemy opposition met in strength. Combat at 23,000, 25,000 feet. Aircraft performed well. Claims, 2 confirmed, 1 probable. Losses, 1 missing. The men still toast the missing. They still clean an empty chair. But the tone is steady. Not desperate, not triumphant, professional. The MK-19's arrival also begins a shift that only becomes obvious months later. The RAF can now think about the coming American daylight offensive with less private dread. B-17s and B-24s will demand top cover at bomber altitudes in daylight. The RAF had bled in daylight over the channel once already and learned what it cost. The Spitfire mine cannot escort deep into Germany. Its endurance is limited, its legs short. But in the belt of air over the Channel and northern France, where bombers form up outbound and reform inbound, where stragglers are most vulnerable, it can now provide a fighter umbrella that the 190 can't simply punch through at will. That will matter when the 8th Air Force begins to send combat boxes east. A moment of testimony gives the engineering flesh. I opened up and felt the extra pull, a pilot writes after his first MK-19 scramble. He doesn't write like an engineer. He doesn't need to. I could stay with them going up, and I could bring the nose where I wanted it. Another, older pilot speaks more quietly. It felt like getting your balance back after a slip. Both men are saying the same thing. Parity is not the same as victory, but parity is the end of dread. Back at Farnborough, the captured FW-190 is still flying. British test pilots throw it into rolling dives and high-speed turns, count the degrees per second it will give them before the stick freezes in their hands, and file comparisons thick with numbers, speeds at heights, climb rates in bands, control forces in pounds. One chart becomes famous in messes, passed around as a smudgy copy, showing 2 squiggled lines crossing above 20,000 feet. On one side of the crossing, the FW-190 rules. On the other, the Spitfire does. It is a child's lesson in leverage. Put the fight where your line sits above his. By late autumn 1942, the RAF is doing just that often enough to matter. The short bursts of the new season, microfights within larger raids, show a new pattern. When German pilots try the old, clean dive and zoom through a British formation that sits at 25,000 feet with speed in hand, they are met with contrails flashing into turns, Eichs pitching their noses with more authority than the summer before. When German formations find British top cover already in position instead of clambering up to meet them, the first bounce is no longer free. The British lose pilots, the Germans lose pilots, the ledger begins to even. And then there is the quiet weapon that war planners love, production. The MK-9 is cheaper in time than brilliance. Because it uses the Spitfire V's basic airframe with modifications, it rolls off lines that already know the drill. Because the Merlin 61 and its follow-ons share much with other Merlins, Rolls-Royce doesn't need to invent an entire factory to build it. By the end of 1942, the RAF isn't counting mech wings and squadrons. It is counting them in wings. By spring 1943, it will count them in hundreds. A small scene closes this arc of development. A maintenance flight lays out a Mech 5 and a Mech 9 side by side in a hangar at Biggin Hill. A senior NCO walks his new tradesman around both. He points to what is new, the stacked supercharger casing, the thicker radiator faces, the different pipe runs, and then he points to what is the same. You already know most of it, he says. He is not being nice. He is saving time. That saved time becomes sorties. Those sorties become combat air patrols flown at altitudes that 6 months ago would have made ground controllers ask for a miracle. No miracles are needed now, just fuel and discipline. The last hurdle is human. An aircraft is a promise. Men have to keep it. The RAF churns pilots through operational training units, feed them into squadrons that are now half veterans and half new hands, and insists on a simple discipline. Fly the aeroplane to its strengths. Don't die showing off the ones it doesn't have. The Luftwaffe teaches the same lessons in reverse. The result is a season of fights where the famous aeroplanes are finally properly matched. Skill and luck and weather decide. By December 1942, no one on either side can say the FW-190 rules the skies without adding a paragraph of caveats. There are belts of air, low and dirty or high and clean, where either side can claim an edge on that day with that mix of fuel and aircraft marks. In that messy truth lies the real story. The 190 had forced the RAF to innovate faster, to accept the stopgap that worked instead of waiting for the masterpiece. The Spitfire Eing had turned up not as a hero in a cape, but as a competent professional who could stand on the line and not flinch. War, in the end, is won by the competent more often than the brilliant. One more figure anchors the change. By early 1943, British fighter leaders planning a day's work assume parity at 20,000 feet and above. They can plan from parity. They can attack from parity. Parity is the springboard to pressure. And pressure, deployed ruthlessly over months, is how a story about who rules a sky gets rewritten. The winter front over the channel hardens into lines of vapor. The fights are shorter now, sharper, more decisive. Controllers at North Weald push their plots a few thousand feet higher as a matter of habit. Wing leaders brief with a pencil jab at the altitude band like a commander pointing at a ridgeline. On the other side, Staffelkapitän warn their new men with the same sentence: don't let them pull you up there. The geography of air has changed. The old playground of the Focke-Wulf, low, fast, sudden, no longer guarantees a safe exit. The new Spitfire has learned to set the table and invite its enemy to dine at an altitude of its choosing. A cold morning in January 1943. 11:12 a.m. contrails over Boulogne. A mixed sweep of Spitfire Eings runs cover for fighter bombers on their turn home. 3 FW-190s burst out of the sun, precise as a metronome, a timed slashing attack that would have split a Mark 5 section in two. The British leader doesn't try to outroll. He doesn't dip into the dive. He lifts the nose a hair, adds throttle, lets the second stage blower bite, and drags the fight up into thinner air. The first 190 follows and feels the stick grow heavy. The second flicks to break the geometry. The third, late to the turn, presents a fat planform. The wingman takes a measured 3-count burst. 1 engine cough, 1 canopy lifts, 1 parachute blooms. Not luck. A demonstration. What happened next made the pattern obvious. The Menko 1X didn't win by turning inside a 190 at low level. It won by choosing where the fight happened, by altitude, by climb schedule, by arrival energy. The aircraft reframed the duel. The Spitfire's gift had always been feel, light hands, quick nose, a pilot's machine. The MK added leverage. It put power where the Luftwaffe expected weakness. It converted time to height, height to first shot to initiative. The war of seconds became a war of bands on a chart, and the British started fighting inside their chosen band. The numbers told a starker story. Engagements logged above 20,000 feet shifted from defense to offense. Climb rates that diverged by hundreds of feet per minute made intercept geometry solvable. Where a Spitfire 5 would arrive late and tired, a Ikes arrived early and loaded, carrying speed like money in the bank. Loss ratios in those bands tightened, then reversed. Not everywhere, not always, but enough to erode the myth that the 190's arrival meant automatic advantage. The Luftwaffe still drew blood, but it had to work for it. A German flight leader writes in his notebook after a February sortie, "They were already there." It is not a complaint about bravery. It is a report about time. Being there first changes everything. It allows the bounce to be yours, the turn to be yours, the exit to be yours. In air war, possession is not 9/10 of the law. It is the law. A micro scene closes a loop dating to Pembry. Farnborough test pilots, men like Eric Winkle Brown, have been ringing the captured 190 for all it can teach. Their notes turn into a brief set of commandments that spread across squadrons like a catechism. Don't chase a dive, go up. Don't fight his first half-second of roll, make him hold it. Don't let the fight settle where your supercharger is asleep, climb until it wakes. These sentences, dry and almost bureaucratic on paper, are survival when spoken over warm engines. War is not won by max speeds alone. It's won by procedures anyone can use under stress. The Menkenheim gave the RAF a procedure that worked. By March 1943, the opposition has adapted. JG-26 chooses more low-light ambushes. JG-2 pushes fighter bombers in 2s and 4s to keep the British guessing. There are days when haze eats the advantage and inexperienced British pilots fall for the same old tricks. But the arc bends. The Spitfire Mark is no miracle. It is something harder to defeat, a consistently good answer. By summer, that answer scales. 2 wings become 3, 4. The RAF's controllers begin to plan sweeps that assume the top cover will arrive on time and in condition to fight more than once. The raids go deeper along the coast. The Luftwaffe cannot be everywhere. It feels thin. Its seasoned men carry 2 burdens at once, combat and instruction. The young come up fast. They make the same mistakes their British counterparts made last year. The ledger still punishes mistakes. Now it punishes them more evenly. A single sortie illustrates the inflection point. August 17, 1943, a day when American bombers spear west to east in the Schweinfurt-Regensburg operation. The Spitfire Marks cannot ride with them to the targets. Its legs are too short, but over the channel and the assembly lanes, its presence is decisive. German formations trying to hit stragglers inbound find high cover waiting. The resulting slicing combats are brief and lethal. A quarter turn, 2 seconds of steady aim, white flashes under wings, then quiet contrails and empty positions where aircraft should be. The IX hasn't solved the deep escort puzzle. It has secured the doorway. In a systems war, securing doorways is how you move entire campaigns. The turning insight lands like a stamp. The FW-190's rule was conditional. It dominated when the fight lived in its preferred envelope and when the RAF arrived late, low, or scattered. The Spitfire Mark didn't just match performance. It manipulated the envelope. It forced choices. It made the Luftwaffe fight up a slope instead of on a flat. In air combat, the side that can choose the terms writes the report. One declarative line settles the thesis. Superiority is not a number. It is control. By autumn 1943, control begins to look like pressure. The Menkenheim appears in more squadrons with more experienced leaders. Mixed wings blend IXs with fighter bombers, using height to guard those who must go low. The Luftwaffe bleeds fuel, hours, and men, training replacements who need months and are given weeks. The British rotate squadrons off the line for rest and return them with their core intact. The German units seldom get that luxury. You can see the end of the thread, even if you can't yet see the end of the war. A German ground crewman at Abbeville watches a 190 taxi out with patched panels and new paint on a wingtip. He lights a cigarette and looks at the clouds. He has stopped predicting outcomes. He has started counting aircraft. The difference shows up in tiny things. Radio nets grow quieter because formations are arriving where planned and less needs to be said. Squadron diaries replace adjectives with figures, altitudes, timings, ammunition spent. After-action reports contain fewer sentences like, "We were bounced without warning," and more like, "We engaged from advantage." It is the language of systems maturing. Then winter again. December 1943. The RAF's new normal is tempo. The Luftwaffe's new normal is triage. Big Week is 2 months away. the Americans will carry the hammer deep. But the anvils, fields, radars, ready racks sit in the Channel Belt, and the Spitfire Mark watches them. The war's scale shifts, and the MAC shifts with it. In early 1944, it starts to appear in the colors of the 2nd Tactical Air Force, which will live close to the ground on Invasion Day. The same aircraft that hunted contrails a year before now fits bombs and stubs its wingtips to bite harder below the clouds. The physics hasn't changed. The mission has. The fighter that won altitude bands becomes a knife for the hedgerows. A paradox only in photographs. In practice, it's just a machine doing what the day demands. June 6, 1944. Dawn to dusk. The channel is covered in ships and wake lines and thin white scars scratched across a gray sky. Allied air forces fly more than 14,000 sorties. Spitfire Imes in invasion stripes run patrol boxes from the Cotentin to Westerham, slashing at any Luftwaffe attempt to mass over the beaches. The Luftwaffe does not mass. It dribbles in 2s and 3s, brave and doomed. A handful break through. Most turn away. The gate is held. The tidy data point that hides the terror. Allied ground troops fight the day without serious fear of attack from above. That absence is a weapon. The Mkang helped buy it in the 2 years before. Consequences stack. In 1944, the Luftwaffe's fighter arm loses men faster than it can replace them. Not because one aircraft is untouchable, because the system it fights is now bigger, steadier, and more flexible. Because the British can afford to rotate units and keep experience alive. Because the Americans fly long-range escorts with P-51s that exploit the high-altitude corridor the IX helped secure. Because each piece supports the next. A veteran German pilot, one of the few left in his Staffel by late summer, speaks with bitter precision. When we came back with 3, they had 4 waiting. When we came back with 4, they had 6. He is not counting models. He is counting pressure. The math that decides wars. The Spitfire Iron's ledger becomes quietly enormous. More than 5,000 of them roll from factories. They serve as the everyday fighter, not the poster queen of air shows, not the unicorn prototype, but the machine a squadron expects to receive when it re-equips. That expectation, predictable, repeatable, undoes the early war's frantic improvisation and replaces panic with process. The RAF could now promise its pilots that what they trained on would be what they fought in, and that what they fought in would be enough. The moral register shifts with the kill boards. Young men report to dispersals with less dread. They still die, but the rhythm of death changes. Triumph doesn't strut, it endures. The Luftwaffe's ground crews, once sure they were servicing the best fighter on the Channel front, now look across their perimeter wire and see black and white striped Spitfires loitering where Focke-Wulfs used to. Confidence drains, not in a single day, but in 100 small leaks. Time folds back to that first day at Pembry. One wrong turn put a Focke-Wulf on Welsh grass. The RAF would have fielded the IX without that gift. The engine was coming regardless. But the captured machine made the fix faster and cleaner. It translated fear into measurements and measurements into procedures. It turned a monster into a chart. And once you can put a monster on a chart, you can beat it. Across 1942 to 1944, 3 cause and effect chains reinforce one another. First, physics. 2-stage supercharging reshapes the fight's vertical axis and lets the Spitfire dictate height. Second, practice. Tactics standardize around finger-4 discipline and altitude control, turning individual skill into repeatable advantage. Third, production. A stopgap becomes a stream, and a stream becomes a flood that keeps squadrons whole. Physics enables practice. Practice justifies production. Production sustains physics. The loop closes. The result is not a legend of invincibility. It's a ledger of solvable fights. The FW-190 remains lethal, especially low, especially sudden, especially in the hands of pilots who know its brutal first half-second of roll. It never becomes harmless, but it stops being a nightmare. It becomes an opponent with strengths to be respected and a set of counters you can teach to a man in a week. A single sentence from a British ace puts the change into human terms. It wasn't that we became brave, he says in a mess long after. It was that we became sure. Sure of the climb, sure of the aim, sure of the plan. In war, certainty, limited, conditional, hard-won, has a body count. Post-war, the statistics will be arranged and compared until the ink fades. Speeds, climb times, turn circles, roll rates. Enthusiasts will argue the decimals. They will miss the larger truth that every pilot learned in his bones. The Spitfire Mark 9 was the mark where a nation stopped reacting and started imposing. The aircraft is remembered not for an eye-popping record speed nor for a single duel, but for a long season of control. Control of height, control of timing, control of fear. Back to a runway by the sea. The gulls lift again, years later, as a preserved Spitfire Axe rolls past a rope line on a summer afternoon. Children clap at the snarl of the Merlin. A veteran watches with a face that does not move and hears something else in the sound, the whine of a second stage cutting in above 20,000 feet, the click of a gun sight settling, the long exhale of a man who will live. He knows how the story turned because he helped turn it. Not through swagger, but through system. Not through a miracle, but through method. Not by out-muscling physics, but by choosing where physics works for you. The FW190 ruled until the rules changed, and the Spitfire Mark 9 wrote the new rules, one altitude band at a time.